This video is part of a 12-entry retrospective on the Kingdom Hearts series. While you can still get a sense of my feelings for this game by simply watching the current video, I may make references back to previous entries, so I do encourage you to watch them in order. It's important to note that since this is a retrospective, there will be spoilers, so proceed at your own risk. If you'd asked me before replaying the games for this video series which Kingdom Hearts game I thought was the best, I would have told you Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days. And I would have been so wrong. I've already stated that it feels to me as if Kingdom Hearts is written with its emotional scenes first, before the writers attempt to haphazardly shape a story around those particular moments. And 358 feels much the same way. This is made even worse by the fact that the timeline is predetermined. The writers had to make the game take a set amount of time so that it fully filled the gap between the other entries. This means that the plot spends a lot of time meandering, and very little of the focus is even on our playable character. Roxas is an inactive element for the majority of the story's runtime. He is stuck until the very end, sitting around waiting for the drama between Axel, Xion, and the rest of the organization to play out. Even outside of that, the story is strange because very little actually happens, and paradoxically, that's part of what makes it so potentially moving. These characters are just living their lives day by day, attempting to find any semblance of fun and purpose they can from it between the hours and hours of monotonous slog that's essentially their day job. And I think that's why I find the game's more potent moments so emotionally gripping, despite how relatively shallow the characters are. It feels like a real friendship with this trio, a friendship that we, as players, actually get to see evolve, more so than with any other trio in the series. The nature of Sora, Riku, and Kairi's struggle is that they're continually trying to get back to each other. So outside of the beginning of the first game and a handful of scenes sprinkled in thereafter, we don't really get to see them bond. But with Roxas, Axel, and Xion, we do. And this makes the final moments when you have to strike Xion down a bit heart-wrenching. Because of this, I think 358 over 2 is one of the better standalone stories in terms of emotional investment, which makes it hard for me to truly suggest skipping it, but it's also one of the least important to the overall series canon. There are no real series-impacting plot twists or revelations, and we don't get an in-depth look into the rest of the organization, which is a hugely missed opportunity. The characters in Chain of Memories feel more fleshed out in one game than the rest of these characters are in both Kingdom Hearts 2 and 358 combined. All you need to know about 358 over 2 days when moving forward in the series is that Xion is a person that existed briefly, and that she, Axel, and Roxas became close friends at one point in time. The sad truth is, many of you watching this likely haven't played 358 at all, and are familiar with the story only as the, well, I hesitate to call it a film, but the collection of scenes that were put together to form a recap in Kingdom Hearts 1.5. Credit where it's due, the one thing the HD remastered scenes are better able to convey is the slow character transition from emotionless husks to full-on characters, through the vocal performances of the actors alone. It does sort of contradict the emotional framing of the voice cast in Chain of Memories, but hey, if I were to nitpick every time a retcon showed up in the Kingdom Hearts series, I could easily double the length of this video series. That's just about the only benefit the movie has over the game beyond the obviously cleaner visuals. They could have easily cut the runtime in half and still gotten the overall point across, because as I said, not much actually happens until the last third of the game or so. On top of that, the movie suffers from being poorly paced because of the lack of gameplay between each section. Often it's simply abbreviated with text summaries that carry none of the weight or emotion of the actual events. The truth is, there's some things that cutscene clips alone just can't replicate. While the characters in this series have always been shallow, and this game's premise of working solely with nobodies makes them even more so, spending time with them through gameplay helps to create a stronger bond with the player. The far too rare missions where Roxas gets to work and banter with Axel, the level where Roxas is purposefully hindered because he lends Xion his Keyblade, and of course the actual final battle where the player themselves is forced to kill Xion are all far more effective than they could ever be through a simple compilation of upscaled scenes. Another absolutely amazing visual technique that could not be replicated in the film is when the game uses both the screens, one to reflect your actions and the other mirroring those actions with Sora, further showing their connection through gameplay. Ultimately, the story's themes flow much more naturally with gameplay to back it up, though said gameplay leaves a lot to be desired. overall the game falls much closer in style to Kingdom Hearts 1 than it does its sequel, once again increasing the importance of platforming and exploration as well as combat. It achieves this mostly through its world selection, all of which are returning worlds with only a couple receiving any massive changes. The rest are impressively recreated given the massive drop in hardware power from the PS2 to the DS. And on a personal level, I'd like to applaud 358 over 2 days for finally making Twilight Town a world worth adventuring in. It actually takes advantage of its vertical space for hiding treasure chests and fighting flying enemies. Of course, 358 does not exist in a vacuum, and I can't blame others who have played every game so far for being tired of visiting the same worlds for a third time. And this tedium is definitely not helped by the repetitive nature of the mission structure. Even if this was your first Kingdom Hearts game, you'd likely be sick of revisiting these areas over and over again by the time you finally reach the game's credits. Unfortunately, visiting those worlds over and over again is simply part of Roxas's job, and for a lot of people, that job is definitely going to begin to feel like real work. Most often, your mission is to defeat a set number of Heartless or defeat a single stronger one, with not much else to it. It's admittedly bare bones, but it works well with the established plot. Personally, my favorite mission types are those that have less of an emphasis on combat, specifically the emblem collecting and Shadow Glob missions, which have you scouring the worlds, using them as an obstacle course and testing your ability to move through them quickly. Recon missions are easily the worst, pushing you to use some of the least developed stealth in video games, while interacting with multiple objects throughout each level, only to have the game stalled by numerous unimportant dialogue exchanges. They were a real pace killer, and I never looked forward to them. Luckily, they're the least prevalent of the mission types. No matter which type of mission you're tasked with, they're often a test of preparedness more than a test of skill. The objectives are clearly stated before you accept a mission, and hints are often given as to what loadout is worth taking. If you're going into a mission against flying enemies, for example, a Keyblade that focuses primarily on ground combos likely isn't the best choice. This focus on preparedness turns properly equipping your character into a minigame in and of itself, a sort of block puzzle where different abilities and bonuses must be Tetrised into your limited amount of space. I know a lot of players found this time-consuming and frustrating, but I thought it worked well as it forces the player to actually care about their loadouts, not just take their entire arsenal into every battle like the first couple of games had you do. And this gives 358 over 2 days a really unique feel, because when it comes to combat, the Kingdom Hearts series is almost always designed around the immediate encounter. It's about survival in the moment. Kingdom Hearts 358, on the other hand, is about survival over the long term, which I find to be an interesting take on the series. You see this in every aspect of its design, from the previously discussed ability loadouts to the way some spells function. Cura, for example, gives you a regen-like effect, slowly healing you as time goes on, but giving you more overall health than a standard Cure spell would. Because each cast of Cure actually takes space on your loadout grid, healing is no longer an infinite resource, which means playing carefully is rewarded more than quick thinking. All of this is fine, but the biggest problem with 358 is a simple one. The actual fighting just isn't very satisfying. Attacks feel limp, and you often do little more than chip damage, even against regular enemies. There's some variety as different Keyblades offer different combos, and you do have spells you can pepper in here and there, but the loadout system means you'll want to save those spells for the larger enemies that you know are hidden throughout each level. After a while, trying to play intelligently became far less effective than simply keeping my health low so I could spam my limit breaks. To make things worse, bosses are almost never mechanically interesting. In fact, they exacerbate the game's worst problems. You don't do a lot of damage, especially on Proud Mode, and when you combine that with the massive amount of HP these bosses have, you're in for a long battle. The length of these boss fights would likely cause players to be even more risk-averse, as having to start them over could easily eat up another 10 minutes or more of the player's life. The worst offender of this is the Ruler of the Sky, which has you chasing the boss constantly, only able to get a few hits in here and there. This makes it a test of patience far more than a test of skill. And the Leech Grave is an absolute nightmare of attrition as well. You know, the more I think back on it, I think I hated every boss fight in 358 over 2, except for the final few that led into the game's conclusion. It's my theory that the combat was made accidentally tedious because of the game's desire to have a multiplayer focus. What's a slog for a solo player will be easily and quickly dispatched by 2 or more, but you can't play the game's actual campaign cooperatively. You can only repeat the missions with a friend who has already slogged through them solo. There are challenge missions that are made specifically for multiple players, though they can still be technically completed solo, but they just contain higher level enemies that hit harder and take more damage. There is no unique content hidden there. It's incredibly disappointing because there's so much wasted potential in this system. You're given the ability to play as every organization member, as well as unlock several other characters: Riku, Goofy, Donald, Sora, even King Mickey. Messing around with your favorite characters while unlocking even more abilities and upgrades you can use both in the solo campaign and multiplayer can be a lot of fun, but the hoops the player has to jump through to get to this point will likely have the player sick of the the game before they can even experience it. And that's already forgetting the fact that you need to find a friend equally willing to slog through the game solo before you can even take advantage of the feature. Ultimately, 358 over 2 days is an admirable first attempt at bringing the series' mainstay gameplay to a relatively low-powered system, but its structure, while well-designed for short pick-up and play sessions over a long period of time, can become quite tedious, which is why I'm so saddened that the game didn't get a remake in the 1.5 package. Of all the entries in this series, this one would have benefited most from this treatment, especially if they actually included an online multiplayer option, but I do understand why Square didn't do this. It would have been far too much work to truly remake a game for the package instead of simply remastering it. I've talked a lot about the things that don't work in this title, but the solid foundation still makes it an above-average action RPG. And when you take into account the system it was released on, it still stands as one of the best on the platform. In terms of the overall Kingdom Hearts series, however, it's hard to argue with those who consider this to be the weakest entry.